as the war went on, I should say, when I was about, let's see, I was 5 in 1914. When I was about 6, I had about enough of the Kaiser and his wars over there. I just thought that was terrible because they were debating whether they should send our men over there. And so I thought, well, I could solve that war. I'd solve it in a hurry. I'd just take the Kaiser and line up all his men, take a great big sword and slice all their heads off, and the war would be over. But nobody listened to me. They didn't. They didn't want it. For some reason, they'd rather fight than have their heads all cut off, I guess. But anyway, fortunately, when they started taking the men into the army, my father was too old, and my mother, and of course my brother was too young, so we didn't have anybody. My cousin went in, and he was one of the first airmen. He was a flyer, and he was on a balloon, an observation balloon. I guess they went over the enemy and spied on them. I don't know what else, but they survived that. But when they were bringing him home, they had to be in a truck. They had a bunch of them in a truck, and they were taking them to where they were going to go, come back to the States, and they ran into a landmine, and it blew up the truck, and so he was, his sight was injured mainly, but he was in a hospital in Maryland Baltimore, Maryland, for a long time before he came home. But he had he had trouble with his eyes. So when he came home, he taught aeronautics at the Glendale Junior College, and they built a plane. They built a plane, and he took me up in it. This is getting beyond where I was, beyond the grades, so we'll let that ride a little bit longer. And anyway, by the time I got into the 5th grade, oh, one thing the war brought us, and I guess it was the war and then moving back and forth, was the influenza, which was very bad all over the United States. And we could not go out of the house. Does that interrupt with my talking? And so everybody wore masks made of cheesecloth, and I think there was mentholatum or some kind of spread in between, and we couldn't go out of the house without wearing masks. Every place you went, you wore a mask for as long as the influenza was there. And one of my sisters was really quite ill. I can't remember which one it was, but my mother brought her bed down to the parlor so the doctor could just walk in very easily and see her very often, because doctors came to the houses in those days. You didn't have to go to the doctor. And but she survived it, and we all did. And then things started getting bad, and my father and my mother started having problems. She had 4 children, and she didn't want any more, and so I think, I don't know, they were getting silly, have arguments. And also I was sitting under the table, under the dining room table, which was all covered with the long linen tablecloth hanging down. I was sitting under it, and I had a piece of paper, and I was making pictures with a pin, punching holes in a paper. You know, I made a house and a tree and a boy, and here comes my father walking into the dining room, and here comes the maid out of the kitchen, and he kissed her. Oh, that isn't right. I didn't say anything. I just waited till they were gone. But soon I learned that my mother and father were arguing, and they were arguing one time when I was about 6 or 7, let's see, 1916, 17, about 1917. That would make me about, I was born in 1909, 8. And they were arguing. They were in the parlor arguing, and I went into the living room and sat down at the piano and played Home Sweet Home. And I remember my mother telling a friend that I'd done that. She says, I'm sure she didn't know what she was doing, but it had quite an effect. I knew exactly what I was doing. I was trying to make them stop arguing, you know. So anyway, that was getting towards the end of our home life, and at the end of 6th grade, my mother and father did get a divorce, and he being a lawyer, he knew all the rules, and he knew exactly how to get what he wanted, so he convinced the judge, you know, means of support. She was a trained school teacher, but then she hadn't been teaching all that time, you know, and he said that she would have no means of support, so usually women went home to their parents when they got a divorce with their own family, and so he said that he would have to take the children, and so the judge gave us all to my father. And there was no such thing as alimony or child support or anything like that, because divorces were very, very rare. This was something really new. And so anyway, he got all of us children, and we were all sitting there waiting for things to happen, you know. And so my mother and her family got together, and they took my brother to Oregon right away. And then my grandmother and my mother, no, it was my grandmother, took, and one of the aunts took my brother to Oregon, and then my mother and took the rest of us up and took us up to Oregon. And so there we started a new life. And it bothered me. I don't know whether it bothers kids today, but I felt a little like I wasn't as good as everybody else because I didn't have a father. And I was embarrassed by it. The neighbors would say, well, where's your father? I'd say, oh, he's coming out later, you know, knowing darn well he wasn't. But it bothered me that I didn't have a father. I always had sort of a inferiority complex or something. But I was very independent, and I was able to earn my own living. I babysat and did a lot of things, and so everything worked out fine. And my mother was the kind, she would never take any charity. You know, she says, I'll scrub floors before I take charity. So she managed to find jobs, and she worked and took care of us. So we got along just fine, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Then when I graduated, here's my graduation class, and I was very good at sewing and making things. Can you find me on there? I made my own graduation dress, and by the time I was 12, I was making all my clothes, my sister's clothes, 2 sisters, and even some of my mother's dresses. Well, my father moved to Cape Girardeau after they split up, and
state?
That's in Missouri. That's up on the Mississippi River. Didn't I have a map? I showed you a map.
Yeah.
It's about halfway. It's up. It is. St. Louis is up here, and it's maybe about halfway up to St. Louis. But that's where he had lived for the rest of his life with his. He married the maid, and they had a daughter. I never met her. My brother went back and he met her, but I didn't. So, but he was a lawyer there, and I think I often want to talk to Rush Limbaugh because his father and his grandfather were both lawyers there, and I think his grandfather would be the age of my father. We had no hard feelings towards our father at all, except that he had left us and we had that emptiness of feeling, you know. But I don't know, I think I felt that all the way through school, even all through high school. I felt sort of feeling of inferiority because our family wasn't complete. I don't know, it just seemed to hang on, and because I didn't have money to do things with and that sort of thing. So anyway, we go on and go through school, and one thing, we went through the 8th grade, and Portland was really cut up very neatly. Everybody in this little group went to this school, and they went to this high school, and you know, there was a border, and sometimes you had a friend across the street, but they were in the other section. They went to that one.
This is kind of a general question. Well, first of all, in Parma, were there many black people?
None.
And what about Portland?
We had a black mayor for years. That was the only mayor I know. I think he was the mayor for about 12 years, you know.
Was that very uncommon to have a black mayor?
I think so, but everybody respected him. He seemed to be a very, very good man. And the black people, the only black people that we knew from Missouri and up through there were the porters on the trains. And on the streets, the shoe shine men were black. And the porters on the trains. And that was about it. Most of them stayed more to the south. And even my cousin, my uncle, who had a farm and raised cotton, couldn't get enough men, the people, to come in and pick cotton. So one time after church, our whole church picked up and went out and picked cotton for him, and then we had a big picnic afterwards, and it was more fun. And I know there was a girl, a black girl I was talking to at the museum. We were giving I was giving an African tour, and she was just crying about her poor relatives having to pick cotton. And I put my arm around her and I said, "Did you ever pick cotton?" "No." I said, "Well, I have." And I said, "It isn't hard at all." I said, "You just go down the row with a big bag, you're pulling a big bag, and you pick off those little fluffy things, and your friends on the opposite side, and you talk and sing all the way down." I said, "I really thought it was a lot of fun to pick cotton. I didn't consider it a burden at all." But then in Portland, I guess the black people were pretty well segregated. We had more Italians. There was quite an Italian village there, I remember that. And outside of that, I don't remember any other. Well, and we'd have, in my class I had one, either Chinese or Japanese, one Oriental, but he happened to be the smartest one in the class. The Orientals were very, very intelligent. And maybe it's because they just didn't get out and play. With the rest of us, you know, they just stayed to themselves and studied their lessons. I don't know, but they were very good students. And even in high school, well, I guess the reason I didn't see many colored people, even in high school, because they were in some other area of Portland, not where we were, because ours was all white. So anyway, what do you want to know about high school?
Just, do you have any experiences that just stand out that you remember?
No, because I was really a very, very avid student. You know, I wanted all college prep and classic, you know. I took 4 years of Latin and 4 years of history and 4 years of English and 2 years of Spanish and, what did I say, 4 years of math? Yeah, 4.5 years of math, really, because I finished it in 3.5 years. And that was the teacher when I graduated and went to Reed College to major in math. My whole thought was I wanted to be a math teacher. And he had me come over after school, and he had a whole room of students from math 1, 2, 3, and 4, a row of each, of failing students. And after school, I came and I coached those math students, and I got every one of them through the regular exam. So he was very eager for me to become a math teacher, and he wanted me to come to Franklin High School. That was the head of the department there. Wanted me to come there and teach. But after the first year, I decided that in those days, a teacher could not get married and remain a teacher, a woman. The only one that could be married was the advisor to the girls' advisor or counselor. I don't remember what they called her. But anyway, the other teachers could not get married. If they did, they had to quit their job. And I decided I didn't want to be an all-meat school teacher. And that's when I left and went down to California. And I had a good foreign language background. And that was when the Depression hit, too. I was on a boat sailing from Portland to Los Angeles. Imagine going on a boat these days. There were no airplanes, no such thing as an airplane. And the Depression hit when I was about halfway down, and I got down there, and I had worked for 2 years for the telephone company in Portland, and I transferred down, and I went down, and I went to the office to report in, and they said, well, sorry, we've been given instructions that we can't put anybody else on. We can't hire anybody. I said, you know, I had a job when I left Portland, and I'm going to sit here till you put me on. And I sat there, and they put me on. So then I went to a Spanish secretarial school and became a Spanish interpreter. And that's when they were just putting long lines in on long distance. And so I had the Mexican board, and I worked as an interpreter for 5 years for them. And what else?
Just for comparison, like how much was your salary like weekly?
Oh, weekly. Now when I started, I had to go through 2 weeks training, and I think that was $9 a week.
Is this for the interpreting?
No, this is the telephone company because it works into it. All right, then when I finished my 2 weeks, then I was put on $12 a week. But we didn't work just 5 hours. 5 days we worked 5.5. We worked half a day Saturday, too. And then eventually I worked up to about $13.50 a week. That was a lot. I think the top salary, each year you got raised a little bit, and I think the top salary is $15.50. All right, I was up, by the time I had spent all those years as an interpreter down there, I was up to the $15.50 a week. What's that, $60, $61, $62 a month? That's $2 a day. I got up to $15.50 a week, but with the Depression, they decided rather than lay people off, they would put each one of us on half-time. So I never earned, very much. I never earned $100 a month in my life, while I was working during the Depression. And then I got married, and then I raised my kids, and then I switched from after 5 years of foreign language and interpreting and all that, I switched to music. I went back to my music, and all the time my kids were growing up, I taught piano and violin lessons, and then I got together a boys' choir of 40 boys, and I directed the boys' choir, and they were very good. And I have pictures of that if you want to see it. Have you seen the picture of the boys' choir?
I don't think so.
Anyway,
just. Okay, wait.
All right, where were we?
So how many years of college did you take?
That's a laugh. Altogether, well, I'm not through yet. The whole thing, all my purpose in college, with the Depression coming, and not being able to just go to college, having to work. My whole aim was not a degree, but getting the subjects that I needed for my constantly changing life. In other words, see, I had my year of math at Reed College, then I went to UCLA, and I had 2 years of Spanish there. See, and I'd had a year at Spanish secretarial school first. Then I went out to UCLA, and I talked to the head of the Spanish department in Spanish. I had no university credits in Spanish. I didn't know where to start. And she said, you can start any place you want. Well, Spanish 101 and 102 were five units, so 5 credits, so I took those. I'd love to have more credits.